Good afternoon and welcome to Felix Ungerman, legislative candidate from District 3. Thank you, Felix, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meetings. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today is Susan DeCamp, volunteer state president, and advocacy lead volunteers Bob Lassen, Ira Nathan, and Mike Barwig. Felix, we appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families across Nebraska. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. So to start us off, Felix, if you don't mind giving us a little background about yourself and your campaign, and maybe keeping that at 5 minutes or less would be great. And once we've completed your opening, then we'll move over into the questions. So with that, I'll welcome you and pass it back to you, Felix.
Well, thank you very much. I'll try to keep it brief by starting off and saying I think you guys have found my website and seen some of the things that are out there and maybe some of the background. I could tell you about those things, but I'll leave that for questions if that's of interest into my biography or my background. Being a military brat, I never lived in one place for very long, moved around in my childhood, went to college in Florida, joined the Air Force, spent 25 years going all over the country, working from the front lines of many conflicts, either on the ground or in the air, as well as working for the White House for several years during the George Bush administration as a presidential advance team agent. I've seen it all from combat to prosperous nations, and it's been very interesting to see how different we all really are, but yet this world seems to work so well in probably the greatest era of peace I think our world has ever experienced. Yes, there are conflicts and wars, but we've never had so much great collaboration. I'll stop there on the background and just say after my military career in 2016, I took up the mantle of running everything for Congressman Bacon in Nebraska as his deputy chief of staff. Some kept calling me the chief of staff for Nebraska. I guess technically they're not wrong, but I didn't want to take anything away from our actual chief of staff who was in Washington. Stood up the office, ran the office, focused extensively on constituent services, and the highlight of that time, beyond working the 2019 floods and trying to bring relief quickly to that within our district in Nebraska, which was historic, but also things like even helping some of the constituents whose families were devastated in the Puerto Rico hurricanes, and even trying to personally, outside of most governmental processes, rescuing people from Afghanistan who lived in Omaha, Nebraska, within the congressional district, which then, of course, I found that I was skirting the edges of congressional ethics by helping a lot of people all across the United States to find resources and ways to get out of Afghanistan, get their families out of Afghanistan. And we rescued hundreds of people that were excess to what the government was able to do. So I really have enjoyed the kind of work we did. We had a project called Project Lazarus, where we were rescuing people from the dead in the IRS tax database that were incorrectly coded during COVID, and no real hits on the IRS. They were doing the best they could at the time from home, and they made a number of errors and coded people incorrectly as deceased. And so we were able to get those people resurrected. Those were some very difficult but very rewarding projects. And then coming up with a very unique solution to passports that were costing people thousands of dollars out of pocket to acquire when the system was overloaded in COVID. That gives you a little bit about me, what I've done. Our team rose to all of those occasions and were named the best constituent services team in Congress out of 435 offices in 2021. We serve the people. That's what we do. And my call to jump into legislature is to serve people and to try and bring some of those things that we figured out how to do that seemed impossible, that made really almost miraculous things happen, bring that kind of same culture and leadership into our state legislature if elected. And as I mentioned, I have knocked thousands of doors, and I have received kind of miraculous responses in the upper 40s to 50s engagement at the doors, which most get about 10, maybe 20% for all the doors they knock. I've been very fortunate to get very close to 50% of the doors answered, and conversations have been amazing. I've been very enlightened, but I've also found out, and some of your questions allude to it, that there are seniors that are very fearful and in trouble financially for where they have lived and assumed that everything was going to be okay. And a result of inflation, COVID, and other factors, including property tax in Nebraska and other taxes, have all created a compounding effect that I want to make a top priority of what I do if I'm a legislator in Nebraska, which is addressing the things that have our seniors in fear or actually packing boxes and selling homes they never intended to. So I'll stop there, take any questions, and I look forward to the interview. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Felix. First and foremost, thank you for your service to our country. I have great respect, and thank you for all the sacrifices you and your family might have made in that regards. Thank you also for your public service, working for the congressman and many other things. It's oftentimes goes unnoticed and unrecognized, and I just publicly want to thank you for that. So thank you again for your service. Moving on to the question side of things now, we have provided you with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50+ in Nebraska. Again, these issues we're going to talk about today are issues that we hear from our members as we talk to them across the state. And that's why we're bringing them to the forefront to have the discussion and putting them in the light of candidates so that they're recognizing these as issues. Looking at a lot about 5 minutes for each question. So we'll go ahead and jump right in with question number 1, which is regarding health, caregiving, and home and community-based care. And Ira Nathan's going to take that. So go ahead, Ira.
Felix, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for joining us. So let me start off by saying 84% of Nebraskans over 45 say that they want to just stay in their homes as they get older, and that's extremely important to them.
Mm-hmm.
Home and community-based services and the area agencies on aging become really important assets to caregivers as they care for their loved ones. Home care not only meets the needs of the loved ones, but it also provides a relief to an already strained long-term care industry. So with that, I just wanted to ask you a couple questions. The first one is, what would you do to protect and expand the home and community-based programs? And we're especially interested in recruitment and retention of a sufficient workforce and adequate funding for programs and services that older Nebraskans and their families rely on. And then the second question is, what would you do to support the 179,000 unpaid family caregivers in Nebraska? So I'd be interested in your thoughts on those questions.
I have one before I start my clock of 5 minutes, which I'm sure I would exceed if allowed to, mostly from my work with the congressman. But you mentioned 179,000 people are unpaid as caregivers. Can you expound a little bit on that? That was something I wasn't terribly familiar with. And I've heard that there are some issues with caregivers who are getting paid for things they aren't doing, and just hearing different things as I'm trying to understand some of these topics. Can you just give me a little bit more so I can give you a better answer?
Sure. And Ira, I'm happy to take that if you would like to.
Sure.
We have, AARP does a study, and they're actually the only entity in the United States that actually does studies on numbers of caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
There are some other groups that do have their own individualized studies, but these are reaching out in data that's provided nationally and then clear down to the state level. It's called Valuing the Invaluable. It's a report that's updated every couple of years. Again, it's sponsored and that data is obtained through research from AARP, which I'm happy to share that document, where I believe it's also linked inside of your backgrounder document that we've provided. But really what the source of that is it's surveying people out across the states about different caregiving initiatives and issues that they're doing. What you're probably finding too is that many people don't associate or identify themselves as a caregiver, even though unpaid family caregivers are people that are assisting someone in their home, at whatever level it might be. They may not be living with them full time. They may be just coming in and refilling their medications. They may be just checking on them, taking them to the doctor. I mean, the span of the services and that can be provided that actually is defined under that is actually quite large. And so again, we have family caregivers who might be doing very little, but it's enough that we still consider them an unpaid family caregiver. They're not receiving any reimbursement, but have a direct familial relationship with the loved one that they're caring for. Oftentimes, Felix, you'll see this in maybe a sandwich generation is the most common type of caregiver right now. Women in their 40s and 50s who are still caring for children at home, but may have a loved one such as a grandparent or a parent living with them, or again, providing some kind of care, and they are sandwiched in between that. So that's the high level of what we're talking about when we say unpaid family caregivers. We know in the state right now, the number is 179,000, but I can guarantee you that number is much larger than that. Again, it's just how are people associating with that term when they're asked whether or not they are an unpaid family caregiver.
Okay, that's very helpful. As I go through these, I always find, even if it's at someone's door, I always get something new I didn't know before. So that's good data to understand. To give you an idea, and don't let me skate on the question about workforce development. I've been putting a lot of thought and interest into how do we solve some of those problems. So I don't want to miss that. But your question about home care for those who want to stay in their homes, I find to be exactly the kind of thing I've been hearing as well and have been engaging with. If you're in Nebraska, you know about the companies like Home Instead, Right at Home, Healthcare Advocacy Network. I've worked with a number of those and more to better understand what they're doing. Some of the challenges I hear in that area is the compensation for things that may be government funded. If we're talking about, say, Medicare, maybe even Medicaid covers some of these things, that it is insufficient for the care being given or the services being provided. And this goes across the healthcare industry, so I don't want to go too broad and miss the point of what you guys are specifically looking for. But I will say I have kind of the largest property that Hillcrest runs within my district on 60th and 370, and I've gotten to know them very well. And one of their top concerns when they are providing care to people who can no longer stay in their home or who want to stay in a home on their property that's assisted, but it's a home that they can live in, they're finding things like Medicaid, Medicare is not even meeting the minimums for what their expenses are. And they've sat down, opened the book, said, look, this is literally our wholesale costs for being able to provide care to people in the least form that we can do at the standard of quality we expect, and hiring the kind of quality workforce that they deserve to have. So you have to pay them well to get the talent that you're hoping to provide. And so when they get a Medicaid reimbursement, it is falling below those numbers, and essentially their business model is failing. So that's one of those things I'm going to be looking at to see if I can try to help advocate or solve that problem for reimbursements, compensations for that. That is a broader thing for the healthcare in general, but it also applies to this area. So things like that are important to me. I have emphasized it already, but I want to emphasize with parents in their 80s now that I'm already doing sort of, what would your end of life plan look like? How can I be best prepared? We never know when our time is up here, but I don't want it to be stressful for you guys. I don't want it to be stressful for me and our family when we get to that point. So looking into this is a very personal thing for me. Recently, my father had, during a bout with COVID, he lost consciousness and he fell in the home and was there for 3 hours. Thankfully, nothing broken, just some bruises, but mentally he was very taken back. And that was my first experience with things like once he's being released after what's covered in Medicare in the hospital, he's now going into a skilled nursing facility, finding the ones that are the best are all full, and because everybody knows that. So I noticed that we really need to look at the standards of what is expected in these kinds of facilities, because when we did find one, it was inadequate in many ways, and the standard of care and quality that was being provided was because contract workers are filling the spots without maybe all of the necessary licensing and experience. And I see some heads nodding, so it seems my parents are in Florida, but I would gather that this is also happening in Nebraska. So again, it gets to the workforce, but it also gets to the compensation so that they can afford, and also setting some policy standards for what is acceptable and what is not acceptable when we're caring for our seniors. And I know you guys are ground zero on trying to make sure that happens. So I look forward to what those answers are. Obviously, there's going to be fiscal constraints to those, but prioritizing them so that we know we're absolutely getting the right things done, taking good care of them, compensating people well, but trying not to break our state budget at the same time. But the things I like to look at it as the things that fall off the plate should not really hurt or harm anyone. Everybody should be okay. It's not as great as we wanted, but some things did fall off the plate of the budget in whatever way that we look to do things so that the top priority things absolutely get done. So that was a long answer, and I don't want to miss the workforce development ideas I've had in this area. So I could either stop there or shift to workforce, your choice.
Feel free to keep going, Felix. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the workforce side.
All right, so workforce, Congressman Bacon has taken a keen interest in that. I don't work for him anymore, but it's only been about 2 months since I stepped away, so a lot of it is still fresh. Things like trying to expand the interest in high schools for students that would be coming out, trying to do as many partnerships, not just with Metro Community College in the Omaha area, which is doing a great job in this area, but getting like dual enrollment programs put in place with incentives. This obviously lowers the cost of education by giving 2 years at an extremely low education cost rate versus a 4-year college. At that point, some people could be CNAs that would have experience literally out of high school, which in parts of my district, there are high schools where students that live in my area are getting those things through partnerships in high schools already, but I want to see it expanded across our state, even if it has to be something in the way of distance learning that could be done so that we can get high school students, juniors, seniors to get those associate degrees that would give technical training and certifications upon graduation. This extends to blue collar, but that's not really what we're talking about. But I think things like CNA and pre-med nursing, those types of programs. My daughter was a beneficiary of this just through a common sense approach that we wanted to save money on her education. We put her through Metro and paid for that while she lived at home after she graduated high school, which I want to accelerate to during high school. And then she went to UNMC and did their 2-year nursing program, and I was able to use my GI Bill to cover her costs. So we were very fiscally responsible with the whole thing. How can we adapt something like that for our state that gives as many high school students as possible? Now, that's just one demographic. We need to help people to want to do these things that may have already graduated high school and having pipelines for those too. I know that Nebraska has put, and I can't remember if it was 20 or 40 million into essentially a scholarship fund for those who are accepted to nursing school programs. I believe her name is Stacy Okander is administering that program in one way. And so she and I have gotten to know each other through the congressman's office, also on the Bellevue Public School Foundation board where she serves as well. And we've talked about getting that out in a better public service announcement kind of program, because there's probably a lot of people who would like to do this. And I've talked to a number of people who come in our office and we've exposed them to this and they said, I never heard of it. So we need to do a better job of promoting things like that. But that is a model for how we could do this in other areas, not just nursing, because many areas are underemployed. There's not enough people to fill all the employment needs in our state, whether it's high tech industry, the IT industry, which actually I've found that Bellevue University has a program that is doing a 1-year master's for international students who are already at the level where they can jump into an IT degree program that is a master's program. Bellevue helps them get their F visa to come over here, and it gets them 3 years. It gets them the 1 year of a master's degree. They complete that, and that's what's the impetus to get them the visa. But then they have 2 years of OTP where they can work in industry before they have to return home. Well, this is also another sort of outside the box way we could think about anything that needs a degree, to have them come here from countries where people want to work. And I've noticed actually recently with my father's situation, that down in the Orlando area, there's a lot of Eastern European people who are coming here and getting work and working in the healthcare industry, extremely capable. They know the English language very well. They're very intellectual, and they're very happy to make whatever they can because this offers them a life that they didn't have otherwise. So I could see some of that also applying. How can we try to pursue those types of things with countries that have people who are eager and ready to get to work on this? That may be more of a federal issue, but I do see them working in Orlando now. So I'd want to explore how do we do that, maybe leverage you guys to help me find some of those resources so that we can try to get more people to work here in Nebraska.
Thank you, Felix. Absolutely great answer. And as far as I want to also publicly thank you for recognizing the need for, we need to increase reimbursement in our facilities and our direct care staff. But there's also then the trickle down is what's that quality of care? What's the transparency that the resident's going to receive out of that? And I think that you hit it on the nail on the head when you said that, because that's critically important. Is we can give more money, but if we don't see the result coming in the quality of care piece, I think that's really important for people to realize. So thank you for your comments on that. Our second topic, we're going to move over into a little bit different space here, is on consumer fraud, exploitation, and protections. And Susan DeCamp's going to take that. So go ahead, Susan.
Thanks, Gina. Hello, Felix. It's great to see you again.
You as well.
And happy to have you with us here today. You saw me nodding my head because right now I am going through that very same thing with my own mother, who is 90, finding a place for her, the staffing issues and all of that. So my question is, scammers are increasingly targeting older adults with scams such as wire transfers, gift card scams. You've heard of that grandparent scam, I'm sure. And now popping up are also schemes involving real property. So nationwide, the average victim of elder fraud lost nearly $34,000 due to these crimes in 2023. And in Nebraska, the FTC showed that there were 4,643 fraud reports made. Nearly 9 in 10 consumers agree that lawmakers need to do more to protect consumers from fraud and scams. So with that in mind, our question for you is, consumers lose billions of dollars each year to online, financial, property, and other types of fraud. What will you do to ensure that Nebraskans are protected against fraud and deceptive business practices and provide opportunities for redress to victims of fraud? Would you support enacting laws to require merchants that sell gift cards to post notices about fraud? Would you support enactment of a consumer fraud restitution fund? And would you support implementation of preventative measures to assist in combating owner and seller housing impersonation fraud?
Wow, that's a lot. Thank you.
Yes, sorry.
And again, new ideas that I hadn't heard about. A restitution fund isn't something I had heard of before. So I love getting new ideas out so we can find what those answers are. I do start with a hesitation when we say we want the government to refund something that happened in a consumer space. Right now, credit card companies are on the hook for that, and there's insurance and other things. So my question to myself as I'm thinking through it is, are we setting a new precedent that kind of puts us on the hook? Obviously, we want to start, this is like with anything, and I actually just gee whiz in the middle of the conversation, I'll throw in, I'm trying to create sort of a model that we could use to get after the full spectrum of stopping sex trafficking and human trafficking in Nebraska, which has become a big problem. But the model works for everything. It starts with prevention. We go into high schools. We have ways to educate when I'm talking about human trafficking, sex trafficking, to educate in that way. So if we had a similar prevention education program, it needs to start with that, where every organization that has any interaction in a professional way with a senior or a retiree is educating them, because it's not getting out there and the word isn't getting out, and they aren't on social media the way that younger people are. They aren't using the internet in the same ways. The TV isn't, being utilized with streaming and thousands of channels. They kind of stick to how, what they've known and what they're comfortable with. So how do we communicate with them? And I think it's an all hands on deck. This is a major problem. Let's start there. Step one, prevention and education. And I've thought about this with cancer as well, and I'm not sure that I'm there as far as how the policy would go, but I feel like a mandate to hospitals to educate people on something called the Right to Try Act that at least makes sure they are educated in all of the things that are available to cancer victims, cancer patients, those who have exhausted all possible avenues and resources. There are more out there, but there's nothing that educates them on it. There were laws passed, but it doesn't do it. So my thought is maybe something in that same vein could work here, where there is a mandate given and there is a specific information source that is government managed so it doesn't become fraudulent or too far afield in and of itself, that meets the needs of what seniors must know, and they are briefed over and over, whether it's maybe in a hospital environment. We ask questions that are kind of outside, when they go in for a checkup. Are you also familiar with seniors being scammed and frauded right now? Here's some information for you to take. Whoever professionally is engaging with them should be part of this effort so that we can help them to understand what the scams are, how they're doing it. The government will never call and ask you to pay them via these mechanisms, and I just heard one recently, which was a cryptocurrency scam that's being done. And Councilwoman Amy Melton from Omaha is fighting that battle and has some good ideas. She's working with the county sheriff, Sheriff Hansen. So I love those ideas, and how can we extrapolate them and expand them into other ways? And everybody's got to be involved, and they've got to get it to the seniors so that they know these things. That's step one. Step two would be, and three would be kind of in those areas of what you're talking about. How do we fight it? How do we counter it? Obviously, collaboration works really well because we don't all individually have all the resources to solve the problem. So a task force could be formed and maybe funded by the government in some way to bring people like the FBI Cyber Crimes Task Force into the conversation with a regularly scheduled, whether it's virtual or in person, coalition for the state that would identify the need to counteract these things that are happening. What tactics are they using? How can we figure out when they use these, and I apologize if I'm using big terms, these VPN cover sites that you can't track back to the source because they make it look like they're somewhere else or someone else with masking their IPs. By the way, I have a computer science degree that helps me out in these ways. So it's getting after them, and I don't know what the answers are, but I know through my networking with Congressman Bacon, I've got the relationships to try and get some of these things off the ground if they're not already off the ground, and trying to advocate for the funding to do that. Now, for those who have already been victimized, how do we help them? That's kind of that phase 3 and beyond. I don't know that I have the answer, and I love all the ideas that you have, but again, you got to balance those in. Are we creating a new precedent that's going to drive a new bill that's going to cause something else to not get paid for? And is that the right way to do it? Or can we come up with ways? Obviously, we stop it first. We intervene in the process and we prosecute and have the AG and others go after them if we can actually identify who's doing these things. But then you have to try and get to a point where you can help them if they have been scammed. And I think there are ways to do that. Maybe things like government-backed financing that's 0% to help them if it's really extensive, where the government essentially says, look, we're going to give you the resources you need. You pay us back. We'll work on deferred payments if you just don't have that. And start with something that maybe enables and empowers as opposed to fully funds restitution. But ultimately, if we get to the point, I mean, my ultimate goal is don't let any seniors end up losing their homes, their livelihoods, their abilities, their benefits, because something like this took all their money from them and they have nothing that they can do about it. We need to help them. And so if it gets to that point, you do have my commitment if we have exhausted many of the other things that may not cost as much from a government perspective. But if that's all we've got left, I don't want any seniors getting kicked out of their homes or losing their livelihood.
Thanks, Felix, for those great answers and your support of the fraud.
Absolutely.
I echo that, and thank you for those are some great ideas to think about. And certainly, as you move to the legislature, those are definitely more conversations we'd love to have with you. So I appreciate your thoughts on that as well. Our last question now, we're going to move more into the affordable housing, livable community space. And again, going back to that concept of helping people stay in their homes and communities. So Bob Lassen's going to address that last question. Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks for your time today, Felix.
Yes, sir.
AARP's goal is to allow people to age in place and stay in the lowest level of care and cost as long as possible. To that end, there's a couple different things I want to address today. One of them is zoning, and the other one is homestead exemption. Zoning obstacles allow just single-family residential homes. In these communities, zoning does not include other housing types, such as accessory dwelling units, manufactured homes, intergenerational duplexes, or apartment buildings, which all may be a better option for seniors rather than having to try to do something more expensive. Nebraskans over 65 are the fastest growing segment of our population, and research shows that most want to remain in their homes and communities as they age. As housing costs continue to increase, older adults are unable to find housing to meet their needs when seeking to downsize, and thus are being pushed out of the communities and homes that they've lived in for generations. What will you do to support, incentivize, and ensure creation of affordable and diverse housing options, such as these auxiliary dwelling units, intergenerational housing, manufactured housing units, and townhomes? And secondly, will you fight to ensure that the homestead exemption program is maintained and protected to ensure that older Nebraskans that qualify continue to have access to these tax relief programs that allows them to age in place?
I love that. And I'm going to start with the softball question, which is the last one you gave me. At the doors, I have met a number of people, several, I'd say in the 10 range out of the thousands that have spoken with me. But about 10 or less were elderly seniors. A subsection of those, maybe about 7 of them, were widows of people who had served in the military or worked an entire career, and they were the breadwinner, and they were facing a loss or a significant reduction in the pension as a result. So one in particular is my story I tell folks, but it represents many others that are just variations of that same story. Is you have a widow who's now lost all or a significant portion of the funds that were there when their husband was alive. And then on top of that, they've lost one of the 2 Social Security payments because they keep only the higher of the 2. And cost of living has gone up. They can no longer mow the grass. The person who was mowing the grass maybe is no longer with them anymore. They have to hire new people and services. And oh, by the way, because of inflation, those costs have now increased as well. But their income and their money has decreased. Some of them have investments that they are utilizing to do that, but the fact that they've lost so much and the cost has gone up so much, and property taxes, which is really the crux of the homestead exemption question, have gone up significantly. In Sarpy County alone, the average over the last 10 years has been a 10% per year increase in valuation, which equates to a 10% per year increase in taxes. The actual number, because of a few variations in there, is about 89.9% increase over 10 years in Sarpy County. But with the projection for next year, it's going to eclipse 100% within a 10-year span. So you've essentially doubled their property taxes. You've significantly reduced their income that they've had, and the cost of what they have needed already has gone up. But on top of that, now they have other services they have to depend on: handyman, home landscaper, or whatever it happens to be. So it's a compounding problem. And I've started to ask a lot of people, how can we solve this? And I spoke to Senator Mike McDonald before the special session, who is a friend of mine, very close, and he's mentoring me in a lot of ways. And I said, Senator, this is what I'm hearing at the doors. This is what I'm trying to get my head around. You're an experienced 8-year senator who's about to be departing, and you're going into a special session. What can be done? And he said, you know what? I'm going to make that into a bill that we look at a couple different ways to address this for our seniors. One would be maybe an income-based option that would say if you are under a certain income in Nebraska and over a certain age, then you would get a full or possibly prorated reduction in your property tax. There are some that do that already. There's been some proposals for veterans and others that would sort of scale down how much you would pay in your property taxes. I think this is a good first step, but ultimately I would like to see all of our seniors. The second idea he had that I really liked was a vested clause. If you are in your retirement years and you have paid, I don't know what the exact is, so I'm just going to throw out a number for the sake of discussion. You've paid 20 years of property taxes in Nebraska. You are considered vested and you no longer pay property taxes anymore from that point on. So I love that idea. I think financially it's going to take a lot of work to try and find out how you continue to pay for that portion of property tax, which is what the governor and the legislature found to be extremely difficult to do. Don't have all those answers, but I think, you know, I'm a man of faith, and I believe that the scriptures that guide me tell me to honor and regard and respect our elderly. To do that. And I see that for my parents, I see that for seniors, and I know that they've worked hard for what they have. And I don't believe that any of them should be fearful of their ability to remain in their home, to afford a comfortable lifestyle they've worked very hard for. And the first thing we can do is address the property tax. I'd love to go on. I don't want to take up all the time. I could dive into another couple of taxes I think that need to be repealed. I've already got draft bills ready to go on, and I'll just at least seed that idea with, for 12 years of a new vehicle's life, if you own a brand new vehicle, you pay an annual use tax for that vehicle that can be over $1,000 a year to re-register your vehicle. I've found a way to get rid of that tax, and I think that would help some of our seniors as well, not just seniors, but everybody in Nebraska at a time when everybody's kind of pinching their pennies and tightening their budgets. So zoning, I love that idea. I want to know more about that. I think certainly we shouldn't hinder creative, innovative ideas. I love the manufactured housing idea. I'm working with Sarpy County Chamber that has Brian Thomas working on this problem set for them. So if you've encountered him, he's got already a commitment for a piece of land that is going to be significantly reduced in cost and subsidized to allow for some of those ideas. And they're working through some of those zoning efforts to get it right. And the county board is working with them as well, which is good because they can change some of those things for that particular property. It's in a more rural area in south central Sarpy County. And I'm really working, Brian's a good friend. So is Karen Gibler from the chamber. And I'm just talking with both of them regularly to say, okay, what are you guys doing? How are you doing this? And obviously having you guys at the table or part of the conversation brings in another aspect we may not have thought of. But you've nailed all the topics, certainly focused on seniors, but workforce shortages, huge problem. Affordable housing, huge problem. Benefits being sufficient. How do we change our property tax code? So I'm excited that I'm hearing from you guys the same things I'm already looking into. And one of my goals as a senator is to show up on day one, not only as a winner of my campaign, but also as a senator who has about 5 to 7 bills that are ready to go that are going to make a big difference day one, which I hear almost no senators do. So I want to change that paradigm in our legislature that you can run for office and then also be prepared in the process and ready to go day one with some impactful bills.
Perfect. Thank you, Felix, for your answer. And again, yes, there's lots more to talk on livable communities, which again is definitely another day's conversation. And AARP does and has been working very hard, especially in the Omaha area, with expansion of some of the zoning and then the accessory dwelling units and all of that. So I'm also excited to hear about Sarpy County, and there are some resolutions in the legislature right now going to be heard on some housing things. So really excited to hear that that's some of your excitement also, and definitely a partnership that we hope to continue to pursue. So we are now coming kind of to the end of our meeting, and I just want to give you back just a couple more minutes to do any closing that you'd like. For the audience, if you want to take a few minutes to talk about what your priorities are for serving in the legislature. I know you kind of touched on a little bit of that already, but specific issues also that you plan to work on or address during your time as a state senator. So a couple minutes back to give a closing, and then we'll close you out.
Yeah, there's some big things I think that could be done. I've mentioned a little bit about trying to fight cancer. It takes 600,000 American lives every year, and it's been a little lower than that, so don't hold me hard and fast on 600,000. It's been in the upper 500,000 range for a number of years. We've also got fentanyl crisis, which takes hundreds of thousands of lives every year and well over 1 million over the last decade. But you got to start with what's most important to your constituents. These are big ideas. I really do think that I'm kind of predisposed to work on and make Nebraska kind of an example in our nation, if not the Midwest, for how we can solve some huge national problems at the state level. Because I also am sort of a constitutionalist, and I believe that the founders intended for the states to be the generators of the best ideas in America, not necessarily Congress. And to show how they can do what they do, some people would say Iowa's really impressing a lot of people right now in the tax categories. And so taking some of those ideas and saying, maybe this will work here in Nebraska too. But trying to get as smart as I can and address some of those big issues. Within my district, having knocked thousands of doors, I'm hearing the number one issue that people say is property taxes, but I've been able to sort of have a conversation that's rolling that back into, sure, property taxes is scaring people because it's going up the most and it's the unpredictable thing that happens to me every year. But in reality, what I'm finding is cost of living effects of inflation also is part of that. So we could fix property tax, which is great. And I'm a military guy, and I believe in triaging a problem that you come across. I served in Afghanistan on the front lines, and I watched vehicles explode right in front of my eyes, wondering if the people were going to be alive after we got to the vehicle to try and find out, how bad the damage was. So what you do is you walk up on that crisis and you look for, what do I need to triage first immediately? And I feel like the special session was an opportunity to do that may have been expanded way too broadly into something so big that nothing really got done, or very little. And my first triage bill towards a property tax relief would simply be to put in a cap on how much your taxes can go up regardless of your valuation. And I think something in the 3 to 5% range would work. There was agreement from the mayors in the county who I've collaborated with, all of them in Sarpy County. And they in unison said we could have lived with a cap on the tax increase at 3%. We didn't like it, but that was kind of our bottom line, lowest amount that we would accept. And when you do that, then you're saying, look, valuations, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Now, if your valuation goes up more than 3%, your taxes will stop at 3% if that's what the legislature agrees to and the governor signs off on. But finding what that is that they can live with and addressing the triage first, that takes a lot of the fear away from people who have seen their property tax bills go up, double digits multiple years in a row. That's gotten very scary. Mm-hmm. I could tell you more stories. I'll stop there on that particular one, but I have to make sure my first priorities are what my constituents need most right away. So I'll be looking at bills that bring about relief and impacts for them, and seniors are at the top of that list. Certainly some of our youth and education, and trying to address things I've already discussed with dual enrollment that also helps out workforce shortages, getting some people incentivized so that the cost of college isn't as bad, like we talked about the scholarship program. So I'm getting a little bit repetitive, but in summary, there's a lot of great ideas out there. And if you're the kind of person who can see the big picture, see the forest from the trees, and then try to scale something down that can really make the difference, I think that's the kind of leadership I bring to the legislature, and I'm excited to get to work already. I wish it was already November 5th.
Thank you, Felix. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the great ideas that you've brought for this discussion. We wish you the best with your campaign. And thank you again for meeting with AARP today. Take care.
Of course. Thanks for all the good work you do.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.